I'm going to tell you something that's been eating me alive for the past month. And honestly, I need you all to understand that every single thing I'm about to do is completely justified. Some of you will probably tell me to be the bigger person or whatever, but save it. I've been planning this for 5 years, and watching it unfold is the only thing keeping me sane right now. 5 years ago, I left home at 22. Not for college, not for some great opportunity, just to get out. My family never understood why I wanted to leave our hometown. We lived in this upper-middle-class bubble where everyone knew everyone, and my parents spent their entire lives obsessed with how things looked to other people. My dad Stephen worked in sales management. My mom Brittany ran a boutique that her parents bankrolled, and they both acted like we were some kind of dynasty. My older brother Kyle was in medical school. And my younger sister Noelle was starting at a private university. Then there was me, James, the middle kid, who wanted to do something different. I told them I was moving to another state to work in tech. Not programming or anything fancy, just basic IT support at a startup. The reaction was immediate and brutal. My mom actually laughed in my face and told me I was throwing my life away to become a glorified janitor for computers. My dad said I was embarrassing the family by choosing such a pathetic career path when I could have gone to business school like him. Kyle called me an idiot for not following a respectable profession. Noelle just looked at me with this disgusted expression and said I was going to end up as the family failure. But here's the thing they didn't know. The thing I never told them because I wanted them to sit in their own ignorance. I wasn't going to stay in basic IT support. I had plans, real plans. And I spent the next 5 years executing them while they probably forgot I existed. I worked my way up. Started at that startup doing support. Learned everything I could about the systems. Moved into network administration. Then got certifications in cybersecurity. By year 3, I was consulting. By year 4, I had my own client base. By year 5, I was making more than my dad ever did in sales, and I owned my house outright in a city 3 states away. No mortgage, no debt, just me and a career that I built from nothing while they assumed I was scrubbing toilets or whatever scenario they'd invented in their heads. During those 5 years, I didn't visit home once. I didn't call for holidays. When my mom texted me twice in year 2 asking if I was still alive, I sent back a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. They never reached out again. I watched their Facebook posts though. Every single one. Kyle graduated medical school and started his residency. Noelle got engaged to some finance guy. My parents posted constantly about their perfect children and their perfect lives. I was never mentioned, not once. It was like I'd been erased. And you know what? I was fine with that. More than fine. Every time I saw them bragging about Kyle or posting photos of Noelle's engagement party, I felt this cold satisfaction knowing that they had no idea what I was doing. They thought I was struggling somewhere, probably living in some rundown apartment, definitely not worth their time. That image they had of me as the family failure was something I wanted them to keep believing until the exact right moment. Last month, I decided it was time. I'd been thinking about going back for a while, but I wanted to wait until I had everything in place. Everything. I'm talking about financial independence, professional success, and most importantly, leverage. Because I knew that eventually they'd need something from me. That's how people like my family operate. They only care about you when you have something they want. I drove home on a Thursday afternoon. Didn't tell anyone I was coming. Just showed up at the house I grew up in. The same oversized colonial that my parents loved showing off to their neighbors. I parked my truck in the driveway, walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. When I heard footsteps inside, I actually felt myself smile for the first time in weeks. This was it. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 5 solid years. My mom opened the door. She looked at me for a full 3 seconds before recognition hit her face. And then her expression twisted into something between shock and disgust. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. The first words out of her mouth were a sneer about whether I came to clean their toilets because that's all I was good for. I just stood there. Didn't react. Didn't move. I wanted to hear all of it. My dad appeared behind her, and when he saw me, he actually laughed. He made some joke about the family janitor returning and asked if I was there to sweep their driveway. Kyle walked into the hallway holding his phone up, and I realized he was filming me. He was standing there recording me while announcing to whoever was watching that their loser brother thought he belonged there and maybe they'd let me wash their cars for $5. Noelle came down the stairs, took one look at my clothes, and made a comment about my ratty shoes tracking poverty into their house. She suggested I use the servants' entrance. My mom added that my cousins were all doctors now, and I'd be lucky to mop their offices. My dad reached into his pocket, pulled out some coins, and threw them at me. He told me it was bus fare home. Or maybe I could use it to buy soap because I smelled like failure. They were howling with laughter, all four of them, standing there in the doorway of the house I grew up in, treating me like I was some kind of street beggar who'd wandered onto their property. And the whole time I didn't say a single word. I just looked at each of them, memorized every detail of their smug faces, and turned around. I walked back to my truck, got in, and drove away while they kept laughing behind me. The entire visit lasted maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes of pure, concentrated humiliation that they clearly thought was the funniest thing that had ever happened. Here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they never bothered to ask. I wasn't there to reconnect. I wasn't there hoping for some kind of family reunion. I was there to see if they'd changed at all, if there was even a small chance they'd grown into decent human beings who might treat their own son with basic respect. They failed that test spectacularly. The drive back to my place took 6 hours, and I spent every minute of it thinking about what came next. Because here's the thing about my family that I learned growing up. Everything they have is built on appearances and connections and other people's money. My dad's sales job depends entirely on his network and his reputation in that small town. My mom's boutique has been failing for years, and she keeps it afloat through loans from her parents and maintaining this image of success. Kyle's medical career is impressive, sure, but he's drowning in student debt and living off my parents' support during his residency. Noelle's finance guy fiancé comes from money. And that entire engagement is basically a business arrangement between families. They're all propped up by this interconnected web of dependence, reputation, and borrowed status. And I knew every single weak point because I grew up watching them build this house of cards. The day after I got home, I started making calls. Not to them, obviously, to other people. People who mattered in ways my family didn't understand yet. I'd spent 5 years not just building my career, but building connections, real ones, the kind that actually matter when you need something done. See, my family thinks success is about showing off and looking important. They never understood that real power is quiet. It's knowing who to call when you need information. It's having the skills to find things out that people don't want you to know. It's understanding systems and how they work and where the pressure points are. I'm not going to do anything illegal. I want to be very clear about that. Everything I'm planning is completely above board. But legal doesn't mean nice, and it definitely doesn't mean they're going to enjoy what happens next. 3 days after my visit, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Kyle. He'd gotten my new number somehow, probably from my mom's old texts, and he was calling to tell me that he'd posted the video of me standing at their door on his Instagram story. He thought I should know that all their friends had seen it and everyone agreed I looked pathetic. Then he hung up. That video existing was perfect, better than I could have planned because it meant there was documented evidence of exactly how they treated me. And I saved that story before it expired. I saved everything. My mom tried calling 2 days later from her cell. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. She wanted to know if I was upset about my visit, and she said that maybe I should understand they were just joking around. She said, I always took things too seriously and needed to learn to laugh at myself. Then she mentioned that actually, since I was doing so well for myself, clearly maybe I could help Kyle with some of his student loans because family helps family. I deleted the voicemail after transcribing every word of it. That's when I knew they'd somehow found out what I was actually doing for a living. Someone must have told them. Or maybe they finally bothered to do a basic search. Whatever happened, they suddenly realized that the family failure they'd spent 20 minutes mocking wasn't actually a failure at all. And now they wanted something. The thing is, I'd been preparing for this exact scenario. I knew that eventually my success would become visible to them. And I knew exactly what they'd do when they found out. They'd want money. They'd want help. They'd want to suddenly pretend like they'd always supported me. And this was all just family banter. But I also knew something they didn't. I'd been quietly looking into their financial situations for the past year. Not hacking, nothing illegal, just using public records and professional connections to understand exactly how precarious their lives actually were. My dad's sales numbers had been declining for 3 years. My mom's boutique was on its third loan from her elderly parents. Kyle was making minimum resident salary while sitting on $200,000 in student debt. Noelle's wedding was being funded almost entirely by her fiancé's family, and my parents had taken out a loan to cover their portion. They were all broke, every single one of them. The house had a second mortgage. The cars were leased. The lifestyle was completely fake, held together by credit and borrowed money and the desperate hope that everything would somehow work out. And I had the ability to make things very difficult for all of them without breaking a single law. So, here's where it gets interesting and why I'm posting this now. Because I need you all to understand what I'm about to do and why it's completely justified after what they put me through. I'm going to call in every connection I have to make sure certain information reaches certain people. I'm going to make sure my dad's professional reputation takes hits it can't recover from. I'm going to ensure my mom's boutique loses the relationships it depends on. I'm going to let Kyle's financial situation become widely known in ways that affect his professional prospects. I'm going to make absolutely certain that Noelle's future in-laws understand exactly what kind of family they're marrying into. And I'm going to do it all without ever speaking to my family directly again. They think I'm weak. They think I'm the failure who couldn't make it. They spent 5 years forgetting I existed and then 20 minutes proving they never cared about me at all. Now they're going to spend however long it takes watching everything they built fall apart. And they're going to know it's because of me. They're going to know that the family janitor they mocked has more power over their lives than they ever imagined possible. I started making the first moves yesterday. I'll update you all when things start happening because trust me, they're going to get desperate soon. And when they do, when they finally understand what I'm capable of, I'm going to be right here documenting every single moment of their panic. They wanted to treat me like garbage. But now they get to see what happens when the garbage learns to bite back. Update 1. Okay, so I promised I'd update you all when things started happening and holy hell, they are happening. I'm writing this at 11 p.m. on a Saturday because I literally cannot sleep with how fast everything is moving. And I need to get this all down while it's fresh because you're not going to believe some of this. First, let me address some comments from my last post. Yes, I know some of you think I should just move on and live my best life without them. I appreciate the sentiment. I really do. But you don't understand. These people spent 5 years acting like I didn't exist. And then when I finally showed up, they spent 20 minutes treating me like actual trash for their own entertainment. They filmed it. Kyle posted it online for people to laugh at. This isn't about being the bigger person anymore. This is about making sure they understand exactly what they did and exactly what it costs. And to the person who said I should focus on my own happiness instead of revenge, my happiness is watching them squirm. I've spent 5 years building a life specifically so I could be in this position. Every certification I earned, every client I landed, every connection I made, it was all leading to this moment. So, buckle up because I'm just getting started. Here's what's happened since my last post. Remember how I mentioned I was going to start making moves? Well, I started with the easiest target, my mom's boutique. Her shop is one of those places that survives entirely on reputation and wealthy clientele. She sells overpriced clothing to women who want to feel exclusive. And the whole business model depends on maintaining this image of sophistication and success. I happen to know 3 of her biggest regular customers, not personally, but through professional connections. One of them is married to a guy I did consulting work for last year. Another one is the sister of a client I still work with. The third one is someone I met at a networking event who specifically mentioned shopping at a boutique in my hometown that matched my mom's description. I didn't lie to any of them. I didn't make anything up. I just let it slip in casual conversation that the boutique owner was my mother. And then I mentioned how interesting it was that she was operating a business while being deeply in debt to her elderly parents and running on her 3rd loan in 5 years. I mentioned how the whole storefront was basically a vanity project funded by family money and how precarious the financial situation actually was. That's it. Just the truth, just facts that anyone could find out if they looked hard enough. And I made sure to mention it to exactly the right people who would absolutely tell their friends. Within a week, 2 of those 3 women stopped shopping there. They didn't make a big announcement or anything. They just quietly stopped coming in. And in a small town where everyone talks, that kind of thing gets noticed immediately. My mom called me 4 days ago, not from her cell this time, from the boutique's business line, which meant she was desperate enough to try any number she had. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail asking me to please call her back because she needed to talk to me about something important. She said she knew we'd had a rough visit, but that family was family and we needed to work through our issues. The tone was so fake it made me want to throw my phone. This woman spent 5 years not caring if I was alive or dead, mocked me to my face when I showed up, and now suddenly we need to work through our issues. Right? Sure. I didn't call back. Instead, I moved on to phase 2. My dad's sales job is based entirely on his network of connections and his reputation as a reliable, successful guy who knows everyone worth knowing. He works for a mid-size company selling industrial equipment and his whole strategy is built on relationships he's maintained for 20+ years. People buy from him because they trust him, because he's positioned himself as this pillar of the community who would never steer them wrong. So, I started asking questions, professional questions. I reached out to some people in adjacent industries, people who might have mutual connections with my dad's network, and I asked about his company's performance. I asked about reliability issues. I asked about customer satisfaction. And when people gave me information, I made sure to mention that Steven from sales had been telling people his numbers were better than they actually were. I made sure to point out discrepancies between what he'd been claiming and what the actual data showed. Again, nothing illegal, nothing even that unusual in business. Just making sure the right information reached the right ears. Making sure people started asking questions about whether my dad was as reliable as he claimed to be. The call started 3 days ago. My dad tried reaching me from his cell, from his work line, from my mom's phone. I didn't answer any of them, but I listened to every voicemail. And let me tell you, the progression was fascinating. First voicemail, "Hey James, it's Dad. Give me a call when you get a chance. Need to talk to you about something." Second voicemail, "James, this is your father. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to call me back immediately." Third voicemail, "You think you're clever? You think I don't know what you're doing? Call me back right now or you're going to regret this." Fourth voicemail, "Listen, son. I think we got off on the wrong foot when you visited. Your mother and I would like to talk to you about clearing the air. We didn't realize you were so sensitive about some jokes. Let's have dinner and work this out." That last one came from my mom's phone, but it was definitely my dad talking. The shift from threatening me to suddenly wanting to have dinner and work things out happened in less than 12 hours. That's how fast his situation was deteriorating. But here's where things get really interesting and why I'm writing this update now instead of waiting longer. Because my family isn't stupid and they're not just going to roll over and accept what I'm doing. They're fighting back and they're doing it in ways I didn't fully anticipate. My Aunt Renee called me yesterday. My mom's older sister, someone I actually had a decent relationship with growing up. She still lives in my hometown, and she's always been the reasonable one in the family. I answered her call because I genuinely didn't expect her to be involved in this. She told me she'd heard I'd visited home recently and that things hadn't gone well. She said my mom had called her crying, talking about how I'd shown up and then gotten upset over some teasing, and now I was trying to ruin their lives. She said Brittany was beside herself with worry and that Steven was so stressed he might have health problems and that I needed to think about what I was doing to my family. I let her talk for about 5 minutes before I interrupted and asked if she'd seen the video Kyle posted. She admitted she had, but she said that was just siblings being siblings and that I should understand they didn't mean anything by it. I asked her if she'd throw coins at her own son and tell him he smelled like failure. She got quiet for a moment, then said that parents sometimes push their kids in harsh ways and that my parents had always wanted the best for me. That's when I lost it a little bit. I told her everything, the 5 years of silence, the complete eraser of my existence from their lives. The fact that they only reached out when they thought I might have money to give them. I told her about my mom's voicemail asking me to help Kyle with his student loans right after spending 20 minutes mocking me. I told her about my dad's sales numbers being fake and my mom's boutique being held together with borrowed money. She tried to interrupt a few times, but I kept going. I explained that I hadn't done anything illegal, hadn't lied about anyone, had just made sure certain truths reached certain people. I told her that if my family was suffering consequences, it was because those consequences were always waiting to happen and I just sped up the timeline. She said I was being cruel. She said that family forgives each other and that I was destroying people's lives over hurt feelings. She said my grandparents were getting old and didn't need the stress and that my mom's boutique was their legacy to her and I was threatening that. I told her the boutique was a failing business kept afloat by elderly people's retirement money and that maybe someone should have questioned that arrangement years ago. Then I hung up. That call messed me up more than I expected it to. Not because I felt guilty, but because I realized my family was going to try to use every single person in our extended family to get to me. Renee wasn't the only one who called. I've gotten messages on social media from cousins I haven't spoken to in a decade. People are coming out of the woodwork telling me to forgive my family, to let things go, to stop whatever I'm doing. And the worst part, most of them don't even know the full story. They've just heard my mom's version, which apparently involves me being overly sensitive and vindictive. She's telling everyone that she made some light jokes when I visited, and now I'm trying to destroy the family business out of spite. But you know what I find interesting? None of these people calling me to forgive my family ever called me in the past 5 years to check if I was okay. None of them wondered why I stopped coming home or why I went silent. They only care now because my family is facing consequences. And suddenly I'm the bad guy for not rolling over and accepting their treatment. Kyle sent me a message through Instagram 2 days ago. Long message, lots of capital letters. He told me he knew I was spreading rumors about the family and that if I didn't stop, he was going to make sure everyone knew what a vindictive psycho I was. He said I was jealous of his success and bitter about my own failures and that I needed to grow up and stop acting like a child throwing a tantrum. I screenshotted the whole thing and saved it. Then I blocked him on Instagram, not because I'm afraid of him, but because I'm done giving them platforms to reach me. Noelle tried a different approach. She sent me a DM on Facebook pretending like she wanted to reconnect as siblings. She said she'd always looked up to me and that she was sorry if she'd said anything hurtful during my visit. She said she was getting married soon and would love for me to be there and that maybe we could talk about everything and clear the air before her big day. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost funny. She doesn't want to reconnect. She wants to make sure I don't do anything to embarrass the family before her wedding. She wants to neutralize me as a threat because she's terrified I'm going to say something to her future in-laws. And honestly, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to reach out to them or not. Her fiancé's family is old money and they're very particular about reputation and social standing. They probably have no idea that Noelle's parents are drowning in debt and that the wedding they're partially funding is the only thing keeping my parents afloat financially. It would be very interesting if they found out, but that's a decision for later. Right now, I'm dealing with the immediate situation, which is that my entire extended family is mobilizing to try to stop me. My grandparents called last night, both of them on speakerphone, which meant my mom was probably sitting right there coaching them. My grandfather told me that he was disappointed in me for hurting my mother, and that whatever issues I had should be worked out privately within the family. My grandmother said she didn't understand why I would want to cause problems for my parents when they'd always provided for me and given me everything I needed growing up. I asked her if providing for someone meant you got to treat them like garbage forever. She said I was being dramatic and that my mother told her I was spreading lies about their financial situation. I told her I wasn't spreading lies, I was sharing facts. And if those facts were embarrassing, then maybe they should have made better choices. She said I was ungrateful and that I'd always been too sensitive for my own good. That last comment hit me hard because I've heard variations of it my entire life. Anytime I reacted to their treatment of me, anytime I got upset about being compared unfavorably to Kyle or mocked for my choices, I was too sensitive. I was too emotional. I couldn't take a joke. It was always my fault for reacting instead of their fault for how they treated me. So, I told my grandparents that I loved them. But I wasn't going to have this conversation anymore. I said if they wanted to understand what actually happened, they could ask to see the video Kyle posted of my visit. Then I ended the call. I'm not blocking everyone. That's important. I want them to be able to reach me. I want them to keep trying to convince me to stop because every attempt they make just proves how desperate they're getting. Every voicemail, every message, every cousin who reaches out to tell me I'm being too harsh. It all confirms that what I'm doing is working. My dad's sales numbers are being questioned by his company. 2 of his major clients have started asking for different sales reps. My mom's boutique had its slowest week in 5 years. Kyle is facing questions about his financial stability from someone at his hospital who apparently thinks residents shouldn't have that level of debt visibility. Noelle's wedding planning is becoming stressful because my parents keep having to admit they can't afford certain things they'd promised. And I haven't done anything except tell the truth to people who deserve to know it. That's what kills me about all these messages telling me to stop. They're not asking my family to apologize for how they treated me. They're asking me to stop defending myself and let them continue pretending everything is fine. Here's the thing though, and this is what's keeping me up tonight. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize this afternoon. When I answered, it was my mom's father, my grandfather, calling from a different phone. He didn't have my grandmother with him this time, and he wasn't on speakerphone. He asked me if we could meet in person to talk, just the 2 of us. He said he wanted to understand what happened, and that he'd been thinking about some things I'd said. I told him I'd think about it, and I have been thinking about it because my grandfather is the one funding my mom's boutique, and if he's starting to have doubts about that arrangement, then everything accelerates faster than I planned. But I'm also wondering if this is a trap, if my mom put him up to this to get me in person where they can ambush me with the whole family and try to guilt me into backing down. Or maybe he's genuine and he's starting to realize that his daughter has been lying about a lot of things. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out because I didn't spend 5 years planning this just to back down now when it's finally working. The family janitor is dismantling everything they built, one connection at a time, and they're starting to understand that all their money and status and reputation means nothing when the foundation underneath it was rotten from the start. More updates coming soon. This is far from over. Update 2. Alright, this update is going to be long because so much has happened in the past week and a half that I can barely process it all. Those of you following along know I was debating whether to meet with my grandfather or not. Well, I did it. And what came out of that meeting has basically set off a nuclear bomb in my family that's still detonating. Before I get into the meeting, I need to give you some context about my grandfather that I didn't mention before. He's 83, retired from running a successful regional distribution business, and he's always been the kind of guy who values hard work and honesty above everything else. He built his company from nothing back in the 60s and sold it for a good amount before he retired. That money has been supporting various family members ever since, including my mom's boutique. When he called asking to meet, I spent 2 days going back and forth about whether it was worth the risk. But then I realized something. If he was reaching out separately from my grandmother without my mom obviously listening in, then maybe he'd actually seen through some of their nonsense. And if there was anyone in the family who might understand why I did what I did, it would be someone who built something real instead of just pretending to have success. So I agreed to meet him. Not in my hometown. I told him to drive to a diner about 40 minutes away, halfway between where I live now and where they all are. I picked a Wednesday afternoon, middle of the week, when it would be quiet, and I could see if anyone followed him or if this was an ambush. I got there early and sat in my truck watching the parking lot. My grandfather showed up alone in his old pickup, the same one he's been driving for 15 years, even though he could afford something newer. That was actually a good sign. He walked into the diner, moving slow but steady, and I waited 5 more minutes to make sure no one else pulled in behind him. When I walked in, he was already sitting in a booth near the back with coffee in front of him. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, and when he saw me, his expression was hard to read, not angry, not happy, just serious. I slid into the booth across from him and we sat there for a moment, not saying anything. Then he asked me to tell him everything that happened during my visit home. Not my mom's version, not what people were saying, but what actually happened from my perspective. So I told him every detail, the comments at the door, the coins my dad threw at me, Kyle filming it, Noelle's remarks about my shoes, all of it. I pulled out my phone and showed him the video that Kyle had posted before deleting it because yes, I saved that. He watched the whole thing without saying a word. When it finished, he set my phone down and asked why I hadn't come home in 5 years. So, I explained that too. How they'd reacted when I said I was leaving for IT work. How they called me an embarrassment and a failure. How I'd spent 5 years building a career and a life while they never once reached out to see if I was okay. How they'd erased me from their lives completely until my mom suddenly wanted me to help Kyle with his student loans. My grandfather listened to all of it. Then, he asked what I'd been doing since that visit to cause so many problems for everyone. I was honest with him. I told him I'd shared factual information about their financial situations with people who had a right to know. I told him I'd made sure certain truths reached certain ears. I told him I hadn't lied about anything or done anything illegal, just accelerated consequences that were always going to happen eventually. He sat back and was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. He told me he'd had his suspicions about my mom's boutique for years, but my grandmother always defended it as giving Brittany purpose and independence. He said he'd kept funding it because he didn't want to create family conflict, but he'd been watching the numbers and knew it was never going to be profitable. He said lending her money for the 3rd time last year had bothered him more than he'd admitted to anyone. Then he asked me directly how much I knew about their finances. I told him probably more than he did, and I laid it all out. The second mortgage on my parents' house, the leased cars, Kyle's debt situation, the loan my parents took out for Noelle's wedding that they couldn't actually afford. The fact that my dad's haunted sales territory had been shrinking for 3 years, and he'd been hiding it by inflating his numbers to corporate and to the family. My grandfather's face did something I'd never seen before. He looked exhausted and angry at the same time, like he'd been carrying suspicions for years, and I just confirmed all of them. He asked how I knew about the wedding loan. And I told him that when you work in cybersecurity and information systems, you learn how to find things that people think are hidden. Public records, credit reports, professional connections. It's all out there if you know where to look. He wanted to know why I was doing this, why I couldn't just walk away and live my own life without causing problems. And I told him the truth, which is that I spent 5 years walking away. And the moment I came back to test if anything had changed, they proved they were still the same people who valued appearance over reality and status over family. I told him they'd had a chance to treat me like a human being and they chose to mock me instead. I told him that every consequence they were facing now was something they built for themselves and I was just making sure the foundation cracked a little faster. He said I was being vindictive. I agreed completely. I told him that vindictive didn't mean wrong, and that I'd earned the right to be vindictive after how they treated me. He asked what I wanted out of all this, what my endgame was, and I told him I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences and that they couldn't treat people like garbage and expect those people to protect them later. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. He wanted to know if I was going to stop. I told him no. I told him I was going to keep going until they genuinely understood what they'd done, not just until they wanted me to stop causing problems. He said that might mean they lose everything. And I said that maybe everything they had wasn't real in the first place. We sat there for another 20 minutes talking about family and responsibility and whether I was obligated to protect people who'd hurt me just because we shared DNA. He told me I reminded him of himself at my age, which I don't think was meant as a compliment. Then he said he was going to stop funding my mom's boutique. Just like that. He said he'd been propping up a failing business for too long and enabling financial irresponsibility and that he wasn't going to do it anymore. I asked if he was doing that because of what I told him or because he'd already been thinking about it. He said both. He said I'd confirmed things he'd suspected and that our conversation made him realize he'd been part of the problem by preventing natural consequences from happening. When we left the diner, he told me he didn't approve of what I was doing, but he understood why I was doing it. Then he drove away and I sat in my truck for a while processing what had just happened because I'd gone into that meeting prepared to defend myself and instead I'd accidentally convinced my grandfather to pull his financial support from my mom's business. That was going to cause an immediate crisis that I hadn't specifically planned for and I needed to think about how to handle it. I didn't have to wait long to find out. My mom called me the next day completely hysterical. She was crying and screaming and barely making sense. But the core message was that my grandfather had told her he wasn't giving her any more money and that I was responsible for poisoning him against her. She said I'd destroyed her business and her relationship with her father, and that I was a spiteful monster who couldn't stand to see anyone else succeed. She said I'd always been jealous of Kyle and Noelle and that I was taking out my failures on the whole family. I let her talk until she ran out of steam. Then I asked her one question. Did she really think her business was successful, or did she just like pretending it was while her father paid for everything? She started yelling again about how dare I question her work and her dedication, and I hung up. Kyle called an hour later, different approach. He tried to sound reasonable and mature, like he was the adult trying to deal with a difficult child. He said he understood I was upset about some things, but that I was handling this the wrong way. He said that families work through problems together, not by attacking each other, and that if I had legitimate grievances, then we should sit down and discuss them like adults. He said he was willing to apologize if I felt he'd been too harsh during my visit and that we could move forward from there.